So, good evening. We are going to begin our Yom Hashoah commemoration service now. As we do each and every year, we remember the 6 million by lighting a candle and lighting a candle in their memory. We are honored this evening that we have 3 of our community who are survivors who will be lighting candles for us. And so I'll first begin with Esther Peterzeil, who'll be lighting a candle. And Esther, if you want, you can tell us who you're lighting the candle for as well.
Mom, tell Rabbi Steinmetz the people in your family who you lost during the Shoah, the names of your family that you're lighting the candle for. Your mother, your father, Himmelfarb, right? Tell them.
We were a family of 10.
Of 10.
And they were all killed by the Germans.
By the Nazis. So she's lighting the candle for all her family.
So I am lighting the candles for all my family.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and Dorothy, if you could help your mom light the candle.
Okay. Here, Mom, let's light the candle. Okay, hold the candle so everyone sees that you lit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, here's our yahrzeit candle. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Oops. I'm now going to turn to Ralph Perlberger, who's going to light a candle. And you can tell us who you're lighting it for.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, we were very fortunate that my mother and my 2 brothers and I came out with the same number that we came in with. So I'm really lighting for all those 6 million that were killed by the Germans.
Thank you, Ralph. And Gabby Major, let me just unmute. If you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm lighting for the 28 members of my family, extended family. My father was one of 7 with big families, for my grandparents, and again, also the 6 million souls that were murdered only because they were Jews. And my mother, thank God, made it with me. But the fact that I'm here, largely, I can really thank Hashem, but I have to thank my most courageous, unbelievable mother. So we used to light candles at KJ together for years. So I'm going to light it.
Thank you, Gabby. And now the Chazan is going to recite the Kel Mully prayer.
Male rachamim shochein bameromim ametzei menucha nechona al kanefei השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות 6,000,000 אחינו בני ישראל, אנשים ונשים, ילדים וילדות, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, שנחנקו, שנטבעו ושנקברו חיים בידי הנאצים ועוזריהם, יימח שמם ומסרו נפשם על קדושת השם. בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור ביצרור החיים את נשמותיהם בגן על משכבותם ונאמר אמן.
This evening, the Yom Hashoah ceremony, we come to do three things. First and foremost, we come to remember the 6 million, to declare that they will never be forgotten. The Nazis murdered them and hoped to erase the Jewish people from history, and we will not forget them. This evening, we also come to recognize the heroism of the survivors, and not only the heroism during the war, but what they have done since to rebuild our community. And the third and most important thing we do this evening is to declare that Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, continues to live. And despite this catastrophe, we have remained absolutely determined to continue to survive and to thrive. We are honored this evening to have with us Pinchus Gutter, who is a survivor of 6 different Nazi concentration camps, who currently lives in Toronto. And his story will be one that will be difficult to listen to and at the same time uplifting. Pinchas has been the subject of 2 different documentaries, and his Holocaust testimony has actually been preserved as a holographic record. And so we are honored to have with us Pinchas, who will now be making his presentation. Welcome, Pinchas.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to speak to everybody in your synagogue. I'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about my previous, before the war, the happy parts before the war. So let me just start with the demographics of the city in which I was born. I was born in Łódź. Lodge, according to Yiddish, when we spoke Yiddish, it was Lodge. And the demographics were as follows. There were 250,000 Polish Jewish citizens living in Łódź. Most of them were very poor, mainly, working in the textile industry, because Łódź was a very large textile industry center. There were 100,000 ethnic German-speaking Polish citizens left over from the time where Poland was divided between the Russian and the Austro-Hungarian empires. The rest were, Catholics or Christians of all kinds of denominations. The reason why I'm telling this, because this is very important for the future. I was born into a Gerech Hasidim family. We were just my immediate family were very small. I had a twin sister. My mother couldn't have children after she gave birth to us. So my father, mother, and the 2 of us lived in a small apartment in the center of town, in an apartment. And in those days, people didn't send the elderly to nursing homes. So next to our apartment, there was an adjoining apartment with an interleading door where my grandfather lived, and he was 78 years old. And he was actually just had an operation before the war, and he was lying in bed ill as the war started. Before the war, I was a very happy child because we had a very large family with uncles, great uncles, cousins. My father had 5 siblings, and we were a wonderful. It was a wonderful family. We were winemakers, according to my grandfather, who had a scroll, kind of like a Torah scroll, in which he had the genealogy of our family going back 400 years in Poland, and all the time there were master winemakers in this. We were winemakers, and we were the 3rd largest winemaking concern in Poland. Of course, we made mainly kosher wine, but we made wine for everybody. I mean, the wine was made kosher, but it was distributed everywhere. And I started my practical, my kind of official life at the age of around 3.5. I started going to Cheder to learn the Chumash and also to become a winemaker. My father, about a few months later, after I started to go to Cheder, my father took me down to the cellars and he started teaching me to become a winemaker. And I think it's very important for you to tell you how do you teach a child who is about 3.5 years old to become a master winemaker. And the story is as follows. He took a small table. I mean, I was a little small boy, and he put something like 12 to 18 bottles of wine. There were no labels. There were just, numbers on them, with obviously painted on with paint, from 1 to 12 or 1 to 18. I don't remember exactly how many bottles. He put a little cup like a Scotch, like a little Scotch shot, and he poured a little bit of wine into every one of these cups. He told me to go and inhale the aroma, the scent of this wine. And I did. I went and I kind of inhaled the aroma. And my father said, when he was satisfied that it was enough, he said, turn around, look at the wall, took away the bottles, mixed up all the cups, gave me one cup. And he says, now I want you to tell me, just inhale the scent and tell me, from which bottle this came. And I said, I don't know. I have no idea from which it came from. But I want to tell you that within 6 to 7 months, 8 months or something like that, I could start recognizing what kind of a grape it was, where it came from, whether it came from Hungary. My grandfather had vineyards in Palestine then, and it's what kind of, whether it was Tokai or, Hungarian or whatever it was, I started recognizing through just the scent. I wasn't allowed to touch it. The only time that I was allowed to touch it was about 2 years later, and then I had to spit it out. But this is how I started to become a winemaker, a productive individual who's going to work in the future and who's going to study and work. So I studied and I worked and I enjoyed myself, and I had a lovely life. I mean, on Saturday, if you were before the war in 1938, 39 in Łódź, I mean, on Saturday, most of the factories where the Jews worked were closed, and people walked around with the streimels. Most of them were Hasidim there, very Orthodox people. They walked around with the Talesim, Hasidim, with their streimels, and the women with their children's little wagon with their children. And it was like walking in Jerusalem. I want to tell you, it was fantastic. And we would run, my sister and I would run to the baker to collect the cholent. And life was wonderful. But this all changed on the 1st of September 1939, when the Nazis attacked Poland, and within 7 or 8 days, they arrived in Łódź. And immediately, those 100,000 ethnic-speaking Germans who were Polish citizens and who were there for a long time, and they started the textile industry, very important part of the population. They immediately got themselves badges with a Hakenkreuz, with a swastika, stuck it on their lapel, and they became the Herrenvolk. They became the Volksdeutsche, and they decided what is going to happen, what's not going to happen. And immediately Jews started being persecuted. There were all kinds of edicts immediately, not later on. As soon as they came in, they started arresting people, they started shooting people, they started taking up. I mean, there was a cafe, the war was still going on, and there was a cafe where Jews used to congregate and have coffee, and suddenly a truck came and took them all away to the Gestapo headquarters. They beat them to death, and they took them to the cemetery. And God knows what else they did. I was a little boy and I was staying at home. My father was at home. Everybody was at home. Nobody was working. Nobody was doing anything because the war was still raging. But they also had the fifth column. And I'm sure some of you know what the fifth column was. Those 100,000 ethnic Germans, were spying for them while, they were getting ready to attack Poland. So they had lists of notables, not only Jewish notables, but notables in general. In other words, Poland had an aristocracy, as you very well know. They had counts and dukes, and people, who were in charge of the community, people who were in government, and they started arresting. They went around with lists. The war was still raging, but already the security service, the Gestapo, the SS, were going around with lists, and they were arresting people. my grandfather was the Rosh Machzikei Adat. It was a seminary where they taught people to become rabbis. So he was on a list, obviously, which they must have got from the Jewish community center, because there was always, the Jewish community had centers, they had organizations, so they went and obviously got lists of them. So they regarded him as a notable. So they came and they although our apartments were one next to each other with the interleading door, but from the stairs, there were two entrances, separate entrances, two separate entrances. So they rang they rang at the bell of my father's entrance. My grandfather's entrance. My father went quickly through the interleading door and opened the door, and there the zwei Malachamovers, these black-coated Gestapo, went and asked for my grandfather. And my father took them into the bedroom where my father was lying ill, and they asked him, what's the matter with him? And he said he had an operation on his kidneys, and he's very ill. And one of them said to the other, and because I spoke Yiddish and I spoke Polish, I was bilingual by that time, one of them said, der social krapieren. And I understood. What it means is that he's not going to, he's not going to live very long. So they asked my father, who are you? Who are you? What are you doing here? And then he said, I am the son. What do you do? I'm a winemaker. Where do you make wine? Come. They took him away. They took him down to the cellars. They beat him almost to death. At least they thought that they killed him. They threw him into a corner, went up out of the cellars, called the military police of the German army, and told them that all the trucks going to the front, they must come and help themselves to the bottles that were there, lying. There were apparently, afterwards, I was told, about 11,000 bottles. And there were huge vats maturing, and they took it all away, and then they broke the vats, and they took that in jerry cans, and then they left. And they destroyed something that I've got records now, which I obtained after the war, not so long ago, about 10 years ago, that this business there existed for close to just under 100 years. And they destroyed it within no time at all, within 24 or maybe 48 hours. The caretaker who saw them take my father down, when they all left, he didn't see my father come out. So he decided to go down and to investigate. So he went downstairs, looked, and found my father lying in a corner. He was unconscious, but he wasn't dead. There was curfew, but he decided to risk his own life. He was a wonderful man, a Catholic individual, who put him on his shoulder and brought him to our home. And my father was unconscious for about 7 or 8 days. And then Dr. Hirschwinkel, who I still remember, he's our doctor, he treated him, and my father recovered consciousness. And then he kind of took him a few weeks to recover from the beatings. And he decided the war was finished. My mother was blonde and blue-eyed, tall. She was about 5'10" or even maybe taller, beautifully dressed. And we, the two children, were blonde and blue-eyed and blue-eyed. And so my father said he had a sister living in Warsaw. Lodz, by that time, was going to be incorporated in the German Reich, which it did. It did after it became a province of Germany called Warthegau, and they built a border accorded. So my father said, you're going to go to the station and go to Warsaw, because Warsaw was a part of Poland, the kind of the rump of Poland left over, which is going to occupy it. And he thought maybe it would be better there, because in Lodz it started being terrible things. I mean, they threw, if you were a tailor, if you were a shoemaker, if you had a convenience store, everybody was chased out, and everything was taken over. You're supposed to give up your jewelry. You're supposed to give up your fares. Your your bank account was frozen, and you could only get once a week a little bit of money. And if you worked for the police, if you worked for the government, if you went for the bank, suddenly 250,000 people across me were unemployed. And things were really getting very, very bad there. So my grandfather said, you go as Christians. So they cut my pious. I had long blonde pious. They cut it off. I cried. And I got dressed. We got dressed like Christians, and we went to the train station. My mother bought tickets. Nobody even looked at us. We were, first of all, my maternal grandfather had a farm, and we all spoke Polish like Polish Christians. You know, we didn't have that Yiddish accent that my father had. So we went by train, and we went to Warsaw by train, and that was about the end of November or sometime middle of December. I don't remember exactly. And we went to her apartment in Warsaw. My father, who of course couldn't take the train because we weren't allowed, nobody was allowed, Jews weren't allowed to use any public transport or go to the parks or anything. Everything, the Jew became an outlaw, a complete outlaw. So he walked at night, smuggled himself across the border, and during the day, friendly farmers hid him in their barns, or he lay in a forest, covered himself with leaves. And so he walked at night, and during the day, he stayed and slept. He arrived, it took him over 2 months to arrive in Warsaw. When he arrived in Warsaw, he started looking for a place for us. And fortunately, at the time, he found a place in Nalewki number 49, which was part of the Jewish area, and the corner of Mila. And remember, I'll tell you later on about Mila, because Mila became a very important part of the ghetto, especially later on. And when he arrived, he found this apartment, a little kind of bedroom, really a very small bedroom, which we 4 of us shared, and a little kitchen where he started setting up a wine making thing, because he had to make a living. I mean, otherwise, how would we exist? So he started buying on the black market. There was no ghetto in the beginning in Warsaw. For quite a long time. They were talking about it, but there was no ghetto. So he started buying raisins, and from the raisins, he set up 2 stills in the little kitchen, and he started making wine. He sent me out to the cafes, all the Polish cafes and Jewish cafes, and collect bottles, which he then put for 3 days in water to make it kosher. And he then took over the label. He had corks, and he made the wine, and then on Fridays, he would give me a rucksack and give me addresses, and I would put 4 or 5 bottles because I couldn't carry more. I was a little boy, and I would deliver them, and people would give me money, and this is how he started making a living. And my mother set up also in Nalewki Street a little kiosk, a window, where she was selling cigarettes and sweets. And this lasted for a little while, and things were bad, just as bad. I mean, I saw thieves in Warsaw of Germans, not Nazi necessarily, but just ordinary on leave soldiers. They didn't have revolvers, but they had a bayonet on their left-hand side. And they would catch Jews with beards and get girls, young girls, Polish, Christian, or Jewish, or whatever, and make them dance in the street like monkeys. And then they started taking their beards off with the skin and bleeding and hitting them and enjoying themselves and laughing themselves. And this little boy going around, you know, looking for bottles and other things. And for some reason, I was never scared. Don't ask me why. I had no fear. I was always running in the street. I couldn't be hemmed into the little apartment where we were. And this went on for a little while. In November of 1940, the ghetto was finally closed. They started building the ghetto, the walls, all that. And then when they decided there was going to be a ghetto, and again, fortunately for us, we had our little apartment was in the ghetto. The front of the building was destroyed by a bomb, but the rest, you know, the quadrangle in the city, big cities, all the buildings are quadrangles with the courtyard in the middle. And so the front of that far front portion was destroyed by a bomb, and it was just ruins. And things started going from bad to worse. They brought in 350,000 to start off with, Jews that lived in Warsaw, into an area which was less than 3% of the area of Warsaw. So can you imagine that they set up a Jewish community council with a Judenrat, with the engineer Chernyakov, who was in charge of it, and they set up a Jewish police, a Jewish prison, a Jewish fire brigade, a Jewish post office, a Jewish bank, all kinds of things, as if it was going to be a kind of an entity, an independent entity, municipality or something like that, except it was just a hemmed-in place, a hell, an apocalyptic hell. And hunger started straight away, and disease started straight away, because the Jewish Community Council had to appoint caretakers for each building, and they had to go to apartments, and people were put into, depending on how big the apartment was, 9 per room, 6 per room, 7 per room, 8 per room. Our apartment was so small that my father used to bring people to sleep at night, those that couldn't find a place and were living in the streets. Because it was so small, they decided it was too small to actually bring in more people, because the kitchen was tiny, and that's where he made his living. And we, the 4 of us, slept in this tiny little room. You know, of course, all the conveniences were in the hallway. Now, this little boy then started collecting bottles, still now from Jewish areas. But I want to tell you something regarding of everything. People talk about resistance, and resistance, they always talk in terms of having a gun in your hand and shooting or something like that. But the Nazis forbade everything in the Warsaw Ghetto. You couldn't do anything. Our calories were 180 calories a day, which is less than a Mars bar. But they started a black market. Jewish cooperators, collaborators. I don't want to judge these people. There was a people called somebody a Jewish Gestapo, but they worked together with the Nazis who profited from that, who started a black market. And because of the black market, a lot of people started selling their stuff, because Polish Christians had permission to come into the ghetto for some reason. So the people started selling first their jewelry, then their clothes, to be able to buy food, to buy bread and potatoes and other things. So the black market, which sounds terrible, but in a way, it started actually helping us to exist. And that's where my father got his raisins. And then my mother had to close the kiosk because she couldn't deal with black market. But my father would buy flour, and she would bake little challahs. And on Fridays, I used to start delivering small challahs, tiny little challahs, and bottles of wine. And this is how they made a living. But at the same time, this little boy who walked around the Warsaw Ghetto, with his eyes like lenses of a camera, and the screen of his mind like a celluloid film, observing all these things. And if I could actually project them, because I can see them in my eyes at the moment, if I could project them to you, you'd be able to see what was going on. Immediately from 1941, because of the disease, because of the hunger, people started dying. And you could stand outside a cafe. There were lots of Jewish cafes there, where the collaborators, cooperators, the Gestapo, the Polish Blue Police, all these kind of administrators and others who had money and could enjoy themselves. And it was a schizophrenic place. So they were dancing, they were roasting geese and ducks, and this little boy would stand and inhale the aroma of all these, the smells that coming out of the kitchen. But my job was to collect bottles. But at the same time, there was a dead body lying outside the cafe, and nobody paid any attention. And soon there wasn't one, there were more and more and more. And I just want to kind of explain to you that the Chevra Kadisha were, walked around with wooden, wooden carts, and they would collect these bodies. Some of them were lying naked, some of them, covered with paper, some of them, still dressed a little bit. People used to take the clothes off to sell it to the Christians so that they could buy bread. and they would put them on. They dug a huge pit in the Jewish cemetery. If you go there today, you can actually see where this happened. And during the time of the Warsaw Ghetto, nearly 100,000 human beings died in the Warsaw Ghetto from hunger, from disease, from shooting, from all kinds of things. And I saw scenes which you cannot even begin to believe that they happened. I mean, officers with their convertible cars would drive through the ghetto, take out their revolvers, and they would hunt people. They would shoot at people. Sometimes they would kill somebody, wound somebody. Sometimes they would miss, but they enjoyed themselves. They came there, either they were drunk or whatever, but you could do whatever you want. The Jew was, as I told you, an outlaw. But at the same time, inside the ghetto, we did not give up. We did not give up. There was a Jewish self-help society that started putting up, going to rich Jews who were still around and collecting money and putting up soup kitchens and getting bread and supplying a person at least a soup and a piece of bread. The Jewish Community Council, the Judenrat, also set up kitchens. They set up underground universities. They set up all kinds of organizations. There was the Onek Shabbat organization, which some of you must have heard, but where they recorded everything. My father sent me to a teacher, I keep on forgetting, I speak several languages, but they come in different ways. Sent me to a melamed, and in a little kind of almost like a cellar where we studied the Talmud. I mean, my father paid this man. He earned making wine, and he paid this man for about 7 months or so. I actually went every day to study the Talmud. And I even remember the Masechta. It was Nadurim Mitten Ran, which is a very difficult Masechta, a very difficult tome. The Durim is very difficult. It's vowels, and it's an extremely difficult one. But I studied it because, I was a Jew and I had to continue. Our resilience was out of all proportion. Our morality, our empathy towards one another. I mean, some of the goodness that you saw in the Warsaw Ghetto is unbelievable. The horrific parts came from the perpetrators. It didn't, and there were some Jewish perpetrators also, but the majority of them tried to do everything in their power, including the Judenrat, including all the people that worked in the administration of the Jews. They tried to make things better. There was Janusz Korczak. There was all kinds of, Beis Yesonim. There were, and everybody tried to make. There were even symphony orchestras. They were theater pieces. They tried to do all these things that kind of, made life at least possible under the most terrible circumstances. But this all finished on the 22nd of July of 1942. There were placards appeared on the walls in Polish and in German to say that we are being relocated. Not everybody, some of the people in the ghetto are going to be relocated. They're going to be relocated because there is unemployment, that there is disease, and that you're going to go to places where you're going to work on farms, and all kinds of things were being told. Not everything was on the placards. On the placards, it was who is not going to be sent out, and all the people working for the Judenrat, all the people that working for they had big factories in the ghetto and outside of the ghetto where Jewish slaves used to go and work. And all these people were not going to be deported. This is how it started. And in the beginning, the Jewish police were the only ones that were taking, they started saying, people that living in the streets, and they took them to the Umschlagplatz, the place of deportation. We called it deportation already from the beginning. And they were sending 6,000-7,000 people out of the Warsaw Ghetto. Within weeks, we knew that those trains are not going to the east. They're going very near to Warsaw, within 2 hours of Warsaw, to a place called Treblinka. And when people arrived there, we were even given descriptions of what happened. There were men with white coats, with red flags, red cross flags, with megaphones to say, this is a place where you're going to be disinfected. It's a way station. If you got shoes with shoelaces, you must tie them together because you should find them afterwards. And they were murdering them. They were murdering them. They were sending them to gas chambers. And in the beginning, a lot of people didn't believe that. How can you believe that hundreds of thousands of people are going to be sent to be murdered? But my father, maybe because of his experience, he believed everything that they said. So we did not, despite the fact that he received these special documents that meant that he wasn't on the, he was on the not on the list of being deported or relocated. And they started offering 3 kilo bread and marmalade for the people that come voluntarily. And a lot of people who were hungry and living in the streets went. And then when people stopped going, in the middle of August, already everybody knew. Treblinka was talked about everybody. This little boy, who by that time was 11 years old, knew exactly what was going on. He knew that we were going to die. And the Jewish police couldn't cope to take everybody because people started hiding and not going voluntarily. So they decided, although the Jewish police was exempt, they and their families, they decided that if a Jewish policeman doesn't bring a quota of people to the Umschlagplatz, I don't know, there were 2,000 Jewish policemen, so they had to each bring maybe 10 or 8, I don't know how many, but there was a quota for them. They would take their families and the policemen and send them out deported. They never spoke about going to die, but everybody knew that we are going to Treblinka to go to die. So we existed in that. My father hid us all the time, despite having documents, despite everything. He decided that there was no way, because what they used to play games, they would say, they would close off a few buildings and they would say, everybody must come this inspection of documents. So people would come down with their documents, and sometimes they were green, blue, gray, I don't know, there were different colors documents that they used to issue. And so people came there with documents, we are exempt, we don't have to go. And they say, oh, no, these documents are now being canceled. We issued new documents. Everybody with these documents have got to come. And then by that time, there was Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Latvians, and they were shooting people with dogs and everything else. And it started being from the middle of August or something like that, immediately within 6 or 7 weeks, it started really getting, people were being shot in the streets. And everybody knew that this is not anymore some kind of a relocation. We lasted because our father didn't trust anybody and hid us all the time, we lasted until the 19th of April of 1943, the day Erev Pesach, when the uprising started. There was an uprising in January where they came to take out people, but they immediately left because they didn't like being attacked, and quite a few Germans were killed. So they took about 5,000 people in the beginning of January, and then they left us. So there was a lull between January and April. But in April, by that time, a lot of people dug bunkers. A lot of our people that lived including our caretaker, built a bunker underneath the ruins. You remember I told you the front of the building was destroyed by a bomb. So there were huge ruins. So they built a bunker just like a mine underneath the earth for about 150 people, a kind of middle and 2 rooms on the side. And as soon as we heard the alarm that they're coming now to liquidate the ghetto completely, and they're going to take there were still workshops there, the Jews worked officially, but of course there were about 60,000. A lot of them, most of them were what they called wild Jews, because people that weren't working officially for the Germans, they were supposed to be not there, but they were there hiding. So we went down to the bunker. It was Erev Pesach. And remember the resilience and the spirituality of, of Judaism. That my father had a few bottles of wine obviously left over. And the baker who used to bake for the factories, for the Germans and so forth, must have baked some matzah. And when we went down to the bunker at night, the first night of the first Seder, with crying and bitter tears, we had a little bit of matzah and a little bit of wine. And I don't know how many people had it. And I said, Ma Nishtana, and we celebrated the Yetzias Mitzrayim. We celebrated the Yetzias Mitzrayim. And with crying, asking for deliverance, begging God to help us. But we didn't forget. We never for a moment forgot who we are, where we come from, and what we represent the thousands of years of Judaism. And we lasted in that bunker for about 3 weeks. We used to, during the night, there were air vents in the ruins that brought air in, there was electricity, and they put in all kinds of water and stuff, so we weren't short of anything actually while we were in the bunker. But the Nazis went from place to place, and they had unfortunately informers who they promised life. And these informers, you would come at night when we came out of it, and they started looking where you could find them. Of course, we were always very careful, but somebody must have found out where the entrances were, and they must have told them. And one day in the first week of May, I don't remember exactly which day, there was a voice coming through the air vent saying, you must come out in a half hour, otherwise we throw gas bombs. They started throwing gas bombs into these bunkers. So we came out, and I never forget, as we came out, there was these stormtroopers, with smocks and with their machine guns across their chest, shouting, Hände hoch, nicht schießen, nicht schießen. And this little boy was proud because I felt that they were scared of us. And they took us, they started burning the buildings. So we were walking in the middle of the road, and there were buildings burning, there were fires burning. So we were walking in walls of fire. And after the war, it suddenly struck me, that, when we were delivered from Egypt, we walked along walls of water. And here we were walking to our death amongst walls of fire. And we arrived at the Umschlagplatz. They pushed us into a little schoolroom. It used to be an old Jewish school and old Jewish hospitals there, into a little small room. They pushed as many as people could, so you couldn't lie down, you could only kneel down. And the Ukrainians and the Latvians, Lithuanians, they wouldn't allow anybody to go out. We were there 2 days and 1 night, and nobody was allowed to go out. So you can imagine what happened in that room. Women with children, elderly men, young men. And I mean, everything was being done there. No water, no food. The only thing is, if you gave them some jewelry, they gave you a bottle of water. My father, I saw him take off the ring from my mother's finger, and he went to the door, and the Ukrainian gave him a bottle of water. My father had saved a sock of sugar, and he had a teaspoon, and he gave the children, me and my sister, a teaspoon of sugar and a bit of water. They never touched it. After being in that room, they chased us. The second day, they chased us down, and as we were being chased, there were rows of these Ukrainians and others with their rifles and things, hitting us with the dogs and chasing us and pushing us into the wagons. My father was like an angel with wings. He kept us very, very safe all the time. So when we got into the wagon and they pushed so many people, he very hardly, he pushed us right towards that little window with the barbed wire on top so that we could actually breathe, because he must have realized that we convert the stick. You can get, and people did. People get, lost their lives they werden erstickt geworden. And the train started going, and I thought, well, we're going to Treblinka, we're going to die. But in our case, we came to a place called Lublin, and we got off this. I didn't know it was Lublin at the time, but we came to a place called Lublin, and they got us off the station. I had no idea what it was. it was sometimes in the afternoon, and they walked us for a while, and we came to a place which I afterwards learned was Majdanek, and they had a huge open area with sand, and they first told us that everybody must give up their jewelry or whatever stuff they have, money, and then they separated men from women, women with children, children without anybody, and they kind of made, and with the dogs and shooting, and my father said to me, I was a head taller than my sister. We were twins, but I was a head taller. My father said, you come with me and you must tell them you're 5 years older. So and he must have known why he told me that. I didn't know. But of course, if I was asked, I would say that. As a matter of fact, my documents that I found out after the war from the Nazis, because they, once you were a slave, everything was written down. I was born 5 years younger. I was born in 1927 instead of 1932. So basically, we waited. But what actually happened? My mother was standing with the women. My sister must have been separated, and she was pushed with children. And I was watching my mother. And as I was watching my mother, I suddenly saw my sister running towards my mother. And she had this long braid, a top, what they call it in Yiddish, a braid, a long braid. And I was watching this braid. And when she came to my mother, she hugged her. So I was watching her back. And my mind played a trick on me. That from that time on, all I remember, if I look, I remember my sister Sabina, I remember only the braid. I can't remember anything. For 11 years, we lived together, we were born together. I have forgotten everything. For example, to give an example, when I walked with her, with the cholent from the baker, she was holding one side of the pot, one handle, and I was holding the other. So I know that she's walking next to me, but I can't see her. I, who have a photographic memory and remember everything from the age of almost a year and a half and 2. I remember crawling after my father's table when he was sitting and smoking a cigar and studying the Talmud at 5 o'clock in the morning and inhaling the scent of the cigar. And I was crawling as a child. I remember it quite vividly, but I can't remember my sister. Then they took all the other people away, and then we were the last one. They sent us into a barrack to dress naked. We ran with our hands high, and there was a man standing with a white coat with a kind of stick and pushing people right, left, right, left, right, left. And I thought, well, we're going to die. And I came into a room with shower heads, and I knew from the Warsaw Ghetto that they put false shower heads and gas would come out. So I started saying my prayers because I was waiting to die. So a Yiddish boy says his prayers. What can you do? But water came out in my place. And then once I got kind of washed out, they chased us in another barrack, and they gave us those striped prison clothes with the striped head and wooden clogs, and they chased us outside, and we were I was looking around, and I saw a lot of people, and I thought, oh, so we didn't die. So where's my father? If I'm alive, my father must be alive. So I ran around looking for people, so I recognized one man particularly that used to come and sleep regularly in our little kitchen in Warsaw. So I went up to him and I said, please tell me, did you see my father? Where's my father? I mean, where I am? So he wouldn't answer. And suddenly he went like this. He lifted his eyes to heaven. And I knew that something terrible happened to my father. I wasn't sure, but the next day I found out that both my father and my mother and sister were murdered the same day that they arrived in Majdanek. Because if you go there today, you can see that the gas chamber is very near the place where, I actually, came under those shower heads and got the water out of them. So I lost my whole family there. And I was in Majdanek for 3 months. And Majdanek was a place of torture, of terror. You cannot imagine. You had to make yourself invisible because every day there was election for the gas chamber. Every day, and the main guards were Ukrainians. And they took great pleasure in killing you, not with a bullet, but with spades. When you went out to work, if they didn't kill 2-3 people and you carried them back you had to carry them back after finishing your work for the day, they weren't happy. So this is how life was in Maidan. Again, providentially, fortunately for me, after 3 months, I was chosen to become a slave laborer and sold to a company, a German company called Hassar, Hugo Schneider Aktiengesellschaft, who had factories of ammunition. And these factories, and so I was chosen to go, and they put us on a train, and we spent a couple of days traveling, and we arrived at a place called Skarżysko Kamienne, where in forests there were 3 camps, Werk A, Werk B, Werk C, and I arrived in Werk C. Werk C was, again, a place, somebody after the war who survived that place wrote a book in 46, published in Argentina, in Yiddish, called In the Fabriken von Teut, in the factories of death, because they didn't guess you, but they worked you to death. We worked with all kinds of picric acid and other acids. We had no protective clothing. The Germans and the Poles that worked that used to come from the towns and the villages on a daily basis, they had protective clothing and they had masks and everything. But we were in rags, and people that worked with these acids, they would die within 3 months. I was again very fortunate. The Rabbeinu Shalom hat mich gehitten. Mein Tat hat mich gehitten von Himmel. And what actually happened was, when you arrived, the internal administration of these camps was in Jewish hands. There was a Jewish police, a Jewish commander. As a matter of fact, it was a woman who was the commander of our camp, Werkse, a very terrible woman who used to walk around with a white coat, with a whip, and she did terrible things. And they were allowed, we called them prominenter, because they were allowed to have women, their women, the men had their wives, and they could even have children, and they had families together, they had special barracks, very good food. We were given really very little food. When I arrived, I was allocated to work with a Jewish policeman called Katz. Katz came from Łódź. He asked the people who you are, as you came, new people to his work group. He work commando. And I told him, my name is Gutter. Oh, he says, are you Ichimaya Zarainiku? Are you the grandson of Ichimaya Gutter? I said, yes. So he said, look, you're going to work with me in my group. And I've got a wife who is sick with TB and lying in the police barrack. And when you come back after 12 hours working, unfortunately, again, I was working on the outside on the firing range, which meant that I didn't work with the acids. You have to look after her, become her nurse. I want you to be her nurse, and I will help you. So I became her nurse for 6 months or 7 months, something like that, as long as she was alive. I washed her, I cleaned her, I tried to feed her, and she was dying slowly, but she was, I became a full-time nurse. 12 hours I worked, and then after that in the evening, before I got food, and he helped me by giving me some extra food, by giving me lighter work. And it was very dangerous work because we used to explode ammunition, old ammunition and stuff like that, and people actually died from that. But he used to look after me, and whenever he distributed the food, because he was the one, he would take it from the bottom so that at least I got some meat and something with it, and so I existed for a whole year. I existed, and I just want to tell you the end of it. And we knew exactly the dates of the Jewish festivals because we observed them. Concentration camp, death camps, but we did not abandon our Yiddishkeit. We did not abandon our Jewishness. We did not abandon our spiritual meanings, our feelings, our emotions. And there were Hasidic Jews there that prayed every day, and they knew the dates. I didn't know what day it was. I knew when Sunday was because we only worked for half a day, and sometimes we didn't work even a whole day, depending how the Germans and the Poles felt, whether they were going to work or not. So one day, Katz's wife had passed away already. We came back from work, and it was Erev Tisha B'Av 1944. I know exactly the day because it was Erev Tisha B'Av. And they always chose these type of special days. And we were told that we must go in front of the commander's office. And he would be sitting in the window, and we must give our name. So I went in front and I gave my name. And as I gave my name, he made a tick. And everybody had to go. And when he finished getting all the names, we were chased into the barracks. We were given our little bread and soup, whatever we get from the night, and we went to sleep. In the morning, they woke us up at dawn, which always woke us up at dawn. We worked 12 hours, but we didn't go to work. They said we must go and stay on a roll call. So we stayed on a roll call. We didn't know what was happening. The commander, after a while, he came with the lists, and he said, I'm going to call out names. And the names that I'm calling out are going to go with trains, with wagons, with the railway to the next camp, because we are evacuating this camp. And we knew why, because we could hear the guns. The Russians were getting nearer. We were near Radom, and they were coming nearer. So they were evacuating this camp because this company, Hassard, had other factories somewhere else. And they were making ammunition and hand grenades and mines for the German army. So he started calling out names. He called my name out, my best friend's name, Yakov's name out, and we were pushed to stand on the other side. So it was one roll call here, and then we had doctors, and we had a sick bay, but the sick bay was an anteroom to death because we had no medications unless you had money or jewelry or something. And the people that came from the surrounding areas had Poles that helped them, so they could still do it. But otherwise, if you went there, the chances were that every few weeks they didn't come regularly, especially, so that otherwise you would run away, or even the doctors would try and hide you. And they took everybody who was sick into the forest and they would shoot them. And then, of course, we also had selections, because if you were not arbeitsfähig, you couldn't work anymore, or they regarded you, the Polish foreman or the Christian or the German Meister decided that you weren't good for work anymore, out. You were going to be shot. So the chief doctor was a woman, very good one. And she didn't treat very much us, but she treated the families of the Ukrainians and the Germans, because they lived around the camp. And she apparently was a very good doctor, on very friendly terms with our Yemachshimo Schulz, the commander. He was an Austrian, he wasn't even SS. He was an Austrian First World War veteran, a policeman from Vienna. And he had lost his hand, so we used to call him Handke, the wooden hand. His left hand was wood. He called out her mother because she was a prominent, she was allowed to have her elderly mother. And he didn't call her. So after a while, she ran up to him, started pulling at his sleeve and said, I didn't hear, but she must have said, let me go with my mother. Why are you separating us? Let me go. I mean, she was friendly with him. And he pushed her back. He kept on pushing her back. And then he lost his temper. And you know what the Nazis used their temper? He called the mother and he shot the mother and her because he lost his temper. And then we looked around, we saw everybody that was yellow, because people from the picric acid would get yellow and they would die within 3 months. Everybody in the rags, everybody in yellow was being called out, and everybody else who looked good wasn't. So we knew this is a selection. We didn't realize it in the beginning. So we started running and trying to hide. So where do you hide? I mean, you're surrounded with barbed wire, electrified barbed wire, but the barracks were built on stilts. But first, I thought I'd hide myself in the chest where the dead bodies are, and nobody's going to find me there. So I jumped in, but I must have been so terrified that I thought myself, I can't be there. So I jumped out and I went and I burrowed myself underneath a barrack, you know, like an animal, trying to kind of save myself. of course, the Jewish police and the Ukrainians and the SS and the Germans and whoever it was, the Werkschutz, started rounding everybody up because he now is not going to call out names. He's going to, if he's got 400-500 people to be shot, he's going to just go and take them out. So while I was lying there, Rebbeinu Shalom saw that Katz found me. So Katz found me and he said, look, I'm going to try and help you. He took me to the police barrack, took all my rags off. I was in tatters. I had already no shoes. I had paper with wire on my feet. And he washed me, combed my hair, and he gave me complete new clothes, high boots like the police wore, a proper hat, not a police hat, but a proper hat. He took lipstick from his dead wife, who he had, rubbed it into my cheeks to make me look healthy. And when I was completely dressed with a jacket and I looked like a human being, he said, go out, there's going to be a new roll call. Schultz, Yom Hashoah, is going to go from roll to roll and pull out people. And with God's help, you will survive. So I went out and I was standing in the front row. Next to me stand Yaakov, my friend. He was in rags like I was. Schultz was going from row to row, pulling out people and throwing them. Now there was a ring and guarded by the SS and Ukrainians, and the SS had machine guns, and they were holding hands, holding everybody in a circle. And if you tried to run away, they would shoot you on the spot. There was no more going with rail trucks or anything like that. Schultz came and stood in front of me, stopped in front of me, looked at me. May have been seconds, but to me it was an eternity because I thought he recognized me, he's going to take me. But without looking, he took his hand and he took Yaakov and he threw him into the hands of a Jewish policeman or somebody to go and die. And for years and years, for 50 odd years, I grieved him. He was 3-4 years older than me, and I grieved. He was my best friend. And in the concentration camp, if you didn't have a best friend and you were a child who wasn't quite innocent like me and who didn't have somebody to help you out, you were lost. And he took him away, and I grieved him more than I grieved anybody. Anyway, I survived that night, and the next day I was sent to another concentration camp in Czestochowa, which was a much better camp from the point of view that there was a Jewish commander inside who made a deal with the Germans. I don't know how. We never saw a German inside. Nobody ever died inside that camp. And I had my bar mitzvah because I found Rav Godel Eisner, who was in the yeshiva together with my father. He knew my family, and he was at my bris actually because he was a very close friend. And he decided at midnight that I would have a bar mitzvah. So I had the bar mitzvah. And because of time, I can't continue telling you, but I was there for 3-4 months. Then, as the Russians were coming, or nearer, we were sent to Buchenwald. I was in Buchenwald for a while, and then I was sent to a German place. The company, fortunately, because I was a slave sold by the SS, the Sassaks started looking for us for Buchenwald. So they got us out of Buchenwald, took us to a place called Kolditz, and then we were there for about 4 months. And then in April, beginning of April, we went on a death march, and 1,500 of us, started the death march, and only about half of us arrived in Theresienstadt a few weeks later, because on the way, we weren't giving any food, we weren't giving any water, we drank water from ditches, we ate leaves. I mean, you cannot imagine what went on this death march. And people were being shot all the time, or just people dropped dead because of weakness and because of things. I'll end and I was liberated by the Russian army on the 8th of May of 1945. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Reb Pinchas, and maybe what we'll do is after we're doing a little bit, we're going to ask you to sing, and then the Chazan to conclude the program. But maybe if you'll stay on till about 9 o'clock, just to maybe talk a little bit about your bar mitzvah and a little bit about after liberation. So we'll those who want to stay on afterwards are welcome to do so. But I first want to just thank Pinchas, and as he noted, we are a little bit tighter on time, but Pinchas is a Baal Tefillah in the Kiever Shul in Toronto, and we were talking about him maybe singing for us, and he chose a song, and maybe he'll explain why he's singing it, and then he can sing it for us.
Well, what actually happened, the first time that I went with a group to take them to Poland as a Holocaust survivor, we were in Krakow on the way to go to Auschwitz. And where we were there, we went around the Jewish area of Krakow, and we went inside the Remu synagogue, which is a very old synagogue, been there for many, many, many years. And the synagogue was inside was complete. It wasn't, they didn't start renovations, and it was exactly the way it was. And suddenly I saw this bima, small, it was a very small synagogue. And then there was the parochet, everything was exactly, as it was original. So I went and I stood on the bima, and suddenly, as I stood on the bima, suddenly started coming out a prayer, and I started singing, and I will sing it for you. Ki lekachto natati lachem torati al tazoilhu eis chayimi lemachaziki bo ותום חיה מאושר. השיבנו השם עליך ונשובו חדש ימינו כקדם, חדש ימינו Of course, my tears were flowing. I was terribly emotional. I get very emotional, and I sometimes miss out something in between, but I can't help it, because it was so emotionally gratifying. It actually was a kind of cleansing. I felt absolutely, when I finished that prayer, I felt cleansed. It was a Jewish synagogue. It survived Hitler. It survived the war, and Jews were still praying every Shabbos there and every day. And it was going back to the holy Remu. So for me, it was something terribly special.
Thank you again, Pinchas. And again, if you could wait for a few minutes after we finish the program with Ani Mamin and Hatikva, and maybe tell us a little bit about the bar mitzvah and after liberation. Chazan Bursa.
בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין. אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין, באמונה של אימה, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין. בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין. בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין.
And we always end with Am Yisrael Chai, we end with hope, we now end with Hatikva.
כל עוד בלבב בנימה, נפש יהודי הומייה, ולפתי מזרח קדימה, עין לציון צופיה. עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Everyone is welcome to stay on. Pinchus has agreed to stay for a few more minutes, and I do have to close before 9 just because of the schedule here at the building. But Pinchus, if you could continue to tell us a little bit about your bar mitzvah and tell us about what happened after liberation.
Well, basically, when I arrived in Chenstochova, inside this camp was like unbelievable. The Jewish commander and the Jewish police, they, as I told you before, we never saw a German inside and nobody died. As a matter of fact, when one of the young people had appendix, he managed to send him to the hospital in Chenstochova town, and they fixed him up and he came back and he survived the war. So this was an incredible camp, compared to afterwards when we went to Buchenwald, where, people started cannibalism. But Rav Godel Eisner recognized me and he said, I'm not sure if you're 13 or not, but we're going to make you bar mitzvah, because it was very dangerous to do these things, even in a good camp where the Jewish police were okay and then the commander was okay. We did it at midnight, and he had a talus and he had tefillin, and don't ask me from where, and he had siddur, and I put on the talus and the tefillin, and he made me do the bruchas, and he benched me, and he said, the Rebbeinu Shalom would helfen as the beleben Hitler. And the interesting thing is that when I came to Kolditz, I found Rabbi Godel Eisner there. He came from another place in Germany. They brought him there, and because I was taken to work in the SS kitchen, I could eat my fill when I was in the kitchen. So when I came home in the evening we weren't at the home. Yeah, we came to the hall. It wasn't already a camp. It was they built bunks in a hall, and we were locked up at night. When I came back, I would give him my soup and my piece of bread, and he survived the war. He remarried, and he became a big Rosh Yeshiva in Israel. And this is the way of the Lord. I mean, and he had children, and he lived to a ripe old age in his late 90s. And that's the story of my bar mitzvah. And After the war, I was liberated in Theresienstadt, and I was taken by the Royal Air Force through UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Agency, to England for rehabilitation. They agreed to take 1,000 children, if you could find 1,000 children under the age of 16, to come rehabilitate in England. So I went to England with the Air Force in August of 1945. We flew to Westmoreland, to the Lake District in England, a place we arrived in Carlisle and went to Windermere, and we stayed there for 3-4 months. And then I went to a yeshiva in London, and that's basically how I started my life. And at the age of 14, I started working because I didn't want to. I was a very proud individual. I'm not sure how. Maybe the way it was inculcated in me by my parents. But I started working when I was 14 years old, I volunteered for the Israeli army when I turned 18, and I bought my own ticket. I didn't go as an Ole, and I arrived in Haifa, and I went to Sarafent, and they looked at this blonde, blue-eyed guy who looked like a goy, and what are you doing coming and saying, you want to join the army? So they said, come back in a week's time. They interrogated me, and then after a week, they decided that I was good enough to go to the army. So I spent 5 years in Israel, and then I left. I got married in England to a South African lady. I was living in South Africa in Cape Town for 28 years, and I was very much involved in community affairs, always trying to help elderly people. It was one of my things. I was involved. I was the chair of the Welfare Council. I got involved in community work because I feel that when people are in trouble, if you were in trouble, you actually feel their pain and you want to alleviate it. And to this day, that's what I do. Here in Toronto, I am the chair of a committee for needy Holocaust survivors. I am also the co-chair of the Canadian Jewish Holocaust survivors and their descendants. So I try and assist people. I was involved. I was a chaplain for 13 years in jail, a Jewish chaplain, honorary, of course. And I had all the festivals there, and I would go look after Jews who were incarcerated. So this is what I've been doing in my life. I've been retired for quite a while, and please God, as long as the Rebbeinu Shalom gives me time, I will try and continue to do that.
Pinchus, I can tell you on behalf of our entire community, we thank you for sharing your heart and your soul with us. It really was Dvarim Hayotzim Min Halev. It truly were words that came directly from your heart, and we thank you for sharing with us, for bearing witness, for teaching all of us to bear witness, and teaching us how we have to remember also the heroism, the spiritual heroism that you were talking about how people took care of each other, and we need to continue to do that as well. So Pinchas, thank you on behalf of our entire community. Thank you for this evening, and thank you all for joining us this evening as well.
It is my duty, and it was my honor to be part of your community and to be able to join you in commemorating Yom Hashoah. It is very important to me, and it's important to all Jewry. It's important to all of us because we continue. We are the nitzots,
the spark, yeah.
Which it says in the Bible. I can't remember whether it was Yeshayahu that said that even if a spark is left, it will grow and it will exist and it will become a nation again.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was an honor, and it was lovely meeting you. And please God, maybe if I come to New York, I'll come and visit your congregation. If I'm there on a Shabbos, maybe you will welcome me.
You and the Chazan will sing together with Hashem's help. We will get a chance to hear you come and daven with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening.